So let's talk about municipal solid waste, which is the solid waste that you and I create, and that goes to a landfill if we don't find a better way to dispose of it. This this global chart shows which countries produce the most and least amounts of waste. So countries in dark red produce the most waste per person, and from this, hopefully you can identify which country we're in, or you're in. You may not be in the United States, I guess, if you're watching this. But does the United States, is it a big producer of garbage? Well, it is that dark red. So dark red means that the people in the dark red countries produce more than 2.5 kilograms of waste per person per day. And so there are a few other countries around that do create that much waste, but we're at the top. So the amount of municipal solid waste, which the EPA just says MSW, that we generate in the United States is increasing. So this chart showing the total amount that's generated in the United States each year, and then this number is showing the per capita generation, pounds per person per day. So how much waste is created per person per day. And so you can see in 1960 it was about 2.7 pounds per person per day, and now it's about 4.4 pounds per person per day. And the good news is that this figure has gone down slightly from the early 2000s. So we're getting a little better, but it's still not anywhere down close to where it was. Oops, I went to the next slide. So we are generating more waste, but we are getting better about recycling more of our waste. So that is the silver lining. If you look at the percent of waste that's being recycled and composted, it's almost up to 35%, whereas in 1960 that was only about 6% or 5%. So it has gone up about 30%. That's good news, right? So we are creating more waste, but we're recycling and composting more waste. We put about 260 million tons of solid waste in landfills in 2015. Or I'm sorry, we generated that much solid waste, and a little more than half of it went to landfills. Now about 35% of our waste, we said, is recycled or composted, compared to, it looked like 5% on the last chart, but 7% according to, depends on which EPA page you look at. So this is from the Advancing Sustainable Materials Management fact sheet for 2015. So we had more than half goes to the landfill, about a quarter gets recycled, 9% is composted, and then we have this 12%, almost 13% that gets combusted. So it gets burned up, and when it's burned up, that powers a generator that creates electricity. Let's talk a little bit about which types of waste we are good about recycling and which types of waste we're not so good about recycling. So more than 75% of the time, we're recycling lead acid batteries and corrugated boxes. So that's good. We're good about recycling these items. More than half the time, we're also recycling steel cans, yard trimmings, and aluminum cans. So steel cans are more like soup cans, and then aluminum is like soda, beer cans. So those, but more than half the time. Water bottles, so people are kind of addicted in the United States to those disposable water bottles. I see people buying, huge cases of water at the store, and then you take those home, and only about 1 in 6 of those water bottles actually gets recycled, which is always shocking because people say, well, they're recyclable. They are, in theory, recyclable, but most of them actually don't get recycled. And so if you look overall at bottles, HDPE bottles, only about 30% get recycled overall, and depends on, that includes more than just the water bottles. Tires also, only about 40% of tires get recycled. A lot of people used to bury tires in the ground, but they are lighter than most soil, so they actually find their way back up to the surface. So it's not a great disposal techniques for tires. And then glass is a problem. Not all municipalities have a glass recycling program because you have to have a market for the glass. And in Arizona, we do have a market because Mexico still will take our glass and recycle it for us. So that's lucky. But some areas don't have anywhere to sell their glass, so they can't recycle it. Okay, so in the waste management hierarchy, this comes from the EPA, the most preferred thing to do with waste is to reduce the amount of waste that you produce in the first place, or reuse materials so that it doesn't go into a landfill, it doesn't have to be recycled, etc. The next most desirable option is to recycle or compost the waste. If neither of those happen, then energy recovery, which is combustion of the wastes to create energy, is the next best thing. And then finally, disposal in a landfill would be the least preferred, but that is necessary if we don't have any other options for that material. The EPA has a definition for source reduction, and that's the design, manufacture, and use of products in a way that reduces the quantity and toxicity of the waste that's produced when the products reach the end of their useful lives. So, what are we creating, and is it something that we can reuse over and over again, or is it something that we're just going to use once and then it goes into a landfill? So we have to design products so they can be reused, so that they hold up over time and can last during reuse, and that when we do put them in landfill, they aren't full of toxic materials that are going to leach into groundwater, and that they're not really bulky and taking up a lot of space. So there's a number of different ways to reduce your source reduction. So composting, we talked about. You can do that for food and yard clippings instead of bagging them and putting them with your garbage. Trying to reuse packaging materials so that it gets used more than once and doesn't go straight into a landfill. Maintaining and fixing equipment to extend its life. So, like if you have a lawnmower that breaks down, try and fix it. Don't just throw it away and get a new one. And then you can select items that have less packaging or less toxic ingredients. We talked about that. This reusable envelope is an example. It says on here, for every mailing, please place a stamp here. So they want you to reuse this envelope over and over again and mail it back and forth to them.